This is Big Tasty Sports.
Happy New Year, everybody. This is the first video for me of 2023. Had a good break overall, and I hope that you did as well. Obviously, all the NFL content feels a little bit strange this week with the injury to Damar Hamlin. Thankfully, today there was news that he is improving and opened his eyes and everything. So obviously, it's just a weird setup when you have such a terrible and traumatic thing happen to someone, and then it's like life goes on as well. So prayers, thoughts continue to be with him, and hopefully his recovery goes well. With that said, today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different, doing it on my own. I'll tell you up front what it is, and then you can decide how much interest you have in it. I've definitely been getting into looking at the impact of turnovers in NFL games a lot more recently. If you've followed me, you've seen me put out some stuff about this. The reason that I'm doing it is because turnovers disproportionately affect the outcome of NFL games in comparison to almost anything else. There's a really strong correlation. So when you lose the turnover differential by one, you have about a 70% chance if you win it by one, you have a 70% chance of winning. If you win it by two, that goes up to something like 87%. If you win it by three, it's over 90. So obviously there are lots of other things that matter in games. And I want to say up front, when I talk through this today, my point is not that this is the only thing that matters. But my point is that at the end of a season is actually one of the best times to look at what we can learn from turnovers, because I think it can tell us some things about how strong some of these teams actually are as we head into week 18 and then into the playoffs. There will be a lot of conversation about point differentials, about injuries, about player matchups, DVOA, all these other things, and all of those are helpful. But what I don't hear discussed on a regular basis is any takeaways from turnover differential in a more detailed way. So, for example, I could tell you that Arizona has a -2 turnover differential on the season. Okay, that's nice. But what was their turnover differential game by game? How often was it one? How often was it more than one? What was it at the beginning of the season? What was it at the end? What was it with different quarterbacks? All of these things are the nuance that I think we can draw out of some of the turnover conversation. So I have spent time looking at all 32 teams, what has happened with them for turnovers this year in relation to a number of other factors. And I'm going to take a team by team look as we go into week 18. Now, I will spend more time on the playoff teams, at least the ones where there's significant information to make a difference. But I will run through all of them, at least in a cursory way, for some of the ones where it's not as important. I don't know that I'll get all of that time stamped with all 32 teams, but I'm going to go in alphabetical order based on their city, not their mascot. So if you do want to try to skip through for specific teams, you could kind of skip through and know what's coming up next. Also, would really appreciate, especially if you watch this video and it's helpful to you, will you please just like it if it's the podcast, like and subscribe, or, rate and review, whatever. Rate and review the podcast, like and subscribe to the video. Doesn't take that much time, and it would be much appreciated. Also, any comments on your thoughts on all of this, I always love those as well. So let's jump into it. First up, we've got the Arizona Cardinals. Like I said, they have a -2 turnover differential on the season. And this is a team that basically we know at this point in the season, they're not very good. They're on their fourth quarterback. Probably not a ton to say about Arizona. One of the things that I'll be saying for many of these teams as well is I did a wins over expectation model based on turnovers, and I posted that on my Twitter if you want to go see that whole article. But I will reference where some of these teams fell. Arizona is number 29 out of 32 on wins over expectation based on turnover. So very bad. They're 0-9 when they have a negative turnover differential this year. 6 of their last 7 games, they've had a negative turnover differential. So they've been bad, but turnovers have definitely played a role in how bad they've been. Their only positive turnover differential was +1 last week against Atlanta. And in that game, they lost on a last-second field goal by 1. So that one game where they had a positive turnover differential, they were actually in the game. Many of the others, they haven't been. So not too much to take away from that. Arizona's not a good team, and if they turn the ball over at all, they're pretty much going to lose. Next up, the Atlanta Falcons, who we had hoped for early on in the season. Well, maybe not before the season, but when it first started, they came out of the gates hot. But then it's been rough for them lately. With Ritter in now, he's not been real great. And they have a -4 turnover differential on the season. They're kind of a weird team where the turnover differential just hasn't mattered as much. They're 4-4 when they have a negative turnover differential, which is actually really good to go 500 in those games, but 0-7 when it's even, which is really bad. Basically, if they're even with a team, they lose. So not much to say about Atlanta, and Atlanta doesn't honestly matter that much this week. We move on to a playoff team, the Baltimore Ravens. They're number 9 in that wins over expectation model that I did. 0.67 wins over expectation based on turnovers. I think a lot of people feel like Baltimore is trending down here, that maybe their defense is still good, but the quarterback position is an issue right now. Lamar really needs to come back, and their offense has struggled. This is a team that would be viewed as not in the same tier as Kansas City, Buffalo, Cincinnati, I think. They have a +5 turnover differential on the season. But here's the interesting thing for them. So there's this perception that they're on a slide, and they are. But in 5 of their last 7 games, they've had a negative turnover differential. So they're putting themselves in really bad situations. And sure, some of that could be Hundley even. They lost 4 out of those 5 games where they had a negative turnover differential. They only had a negative turnover differential once in their first 10 games. So this has been a massive swing on the turnover side from 1 game out of 10% to 5 out of the last 7 where their turnover differential was negative. And I think that has a significant impact on what's been happening with this team in general. In those first 10 games, 7 of the 10, they had a positive turnover differential. So they weren't even staying even most of the time. And I think that was part of what was building them up. So with Baltimore, certainly we have to downgrade them some because of other things going on with the team. However, if they are able to stay on the right side of that turnover differential, I still think they're better than how they're being currently perceived. And so I think there's the chance that there could be some value on Baltimore, whether that's this week against Cincinnati or going into the playoffs. I would probably agree that they're not in that very top tier, but I think they're just not as far below it as we might feel like they are right now. And I think the turnovers have a story to tell there with the Ravens. Next up, we go to the Buffalo Bills. Obviously, this week they will be dealing with a lot of emotional difficulty, even trauma for some of them with their teammate. Hopefully, the positive news that's been coming out can give them some encouragement as they head into this Week 18 game. Buffalo has a -1 turnover differential on the year, so this is a team that has performed well, but really it hasn't been positive for them with turnovers overall in the season. They're number 2, though, in that wins over expectation model that I built, 4.78 wins over expectation based on their turnover differential. I think the narrative right now is that Buffalo's not really hitting on all cylinders offensively, and they still have a lot of people missing defensively, but still viewed as one of the top 3 in the AFC with Kansas City and Cincinnati, certainly in that top tier. Buffalo has had a negative turnover differential in 4 of their last 5 games. However, they're on a 5-game win streak. That's really impressive to be that bad in the turnover department and still be winning games. So some of these games have been closer than people would expect them to be, but there's a reason they've been closer, and the fact they're still pulling it out, I think, is a big positive. They're 7-0 this year in games where their turnover differential is positive or even. These are indicators to me of a really good team. When you win all the games, when you're winning the turnover battle or even in that battle, that's a really positive sign. And then to be able to run off wins, even when you're losing that battle, is something that almost no teams are able to do, with a couple exceptions that we will get to. So, if anything, I think Buffalo might be undervalued right now. Again, it comes down to them taking care of the ball. But if they can take care of the ball, this team may just be what we thought they were, even with some of the key pieces that they have missing. So I like Buffalo moving forward if they can just protect the ball a little bit better. Next is the Carolina Panthers. Not going to spend a lot of time here. -3 turnover differential in the season. Number 25 in my wins over expectation model. So not very good. The run that they had was very turnover dependent. They are 5-1 with a positive turnover differential and 1-10 otherwise. I mean, that just tells the story. They can win games if they win the turnover battle, but if they don't, they're screwed. And that's what we saw played out for Carolina. I don't think more needs to be said about them than that. Chicago, dead last in my wins over expectation model. Fields is fun, but Fields isn't playing. Basically, this is a team that sucks at this point. They do have some potential. They're going to be playing a Vikings team that really doesn't have anything to play for. As a Vikings fan, I hope they sit everybody down. There's just no reason to play any starters in this game. So we'll see what happens. Bigger picture, not a lot needs to be said about Chicago, but they had a 0 turnover differential on the season. So they were this bad, and we can't even really blame it on turnovers. They had a positive turnover differential in 4 of their last 7 and still lost all of them. So this is a team where the turnover story just reinforces what we already know, which is that this is really not a good team and maybe even worse than we've thought. We move on to another playoff team. That's the Cincinnati Bengals. They are number 7 in my wins over expectation model at 1.53. And this is a team that people, I think, look at as peaking right now. One of the top 3 teams in the AFC, a real contender to get back to the Super Bowl, maybe even win it. Just a really strong team. So what do turnovers tell us with Cincinnati? Well, they've won 8 straight games, +6 turnover differential in the season. First, forgot to say that, but won 8 straight. They had a negative turnover differential in 2 of those 8 games. So again, this is a strong signal when you get wins in 2 straight games where you had a negative turnover differential. And even stronger, both of those were -2. They didn't just lose that battle by 1, they lost it by 2, where their chances of winning that game statistically are somewhere around 17% or less. So that's really strong from them and a positive indicator. They beat New England 22-18 in one of those games, and they throttled Carolina 42-21 in one of those games. So I would say, to the extent that you weave in what the turnovers are kind of telling us about a team into the way you're looking at them heading into week 18 in the playoffs, it's really positive for Cincinnati. They are perceived as one of the strongest teams, and I would say that perception is reality based on this metric anyway. Next, we go to Cleveland. Again, they're out of the playoffs. I don't think we need to spend too much time here. Number 23 in my model, +2 turnover differential on the season. Some of this is just fun to share, to shit on Deshaun Watson in particular. They won 5 of their last 7, but they had a +2 turnover differential or better in 4 of those 5. So they basically won because they won the turnover battle. They didn't have a +2 or better game the rest of the year. So anything that looks good for Deshaun Watson here, I would put a hefty percentage of it on the fact that his team has showed up for him in winning the turnover battle. And I think this is not really a great look for him in terms of what he needed to pull off any of their wins. From there, we move on to Dallas. This is a team I would want to say a lot about, and I think there's a little we can take away, but turnover differential actually doesn't have a lot to say for Dallas, I don't think. So they're number 5 in my model, and that is an indicator of strength at 2.16 games wins over expectation based on their turnover differentials. I think people view them as a top 3 team in the NFC with San Francisco and Philadelphia, and maybe rightly so. However, I will say they do have a +12 turnover differential on the season, so that's definitely helped. Now, they still are over 2 games better than is to be expected with that turnover differential. So I don't think we can take anything away from them. That's where both of those metrics, I think, are helpful, not just one of them. They are 4-1 when they have a negative turnover differential. Heading into the playoffs, this is one of the things that I'm looking at. Not that I would just go bet a team because this is true, but it's something that I like to see. That if you lose the turnover battle, you're good enough to still go out and win the game. And Dallas has done that this year. Going 4-1 when they've had a negative turnover differential is really good. 9 of their games have had a positive turnover differential, so they've put themselves in a good position many times. In 2 of their, this is the interesting thing, is in 2 of their recent losses, they actually had a positive turnover differential, which if that was happening more frequently, I would say that's a real negative for a team to be winning that battle and still losing the games. And I don't think it's good that they've done that a couple times. And it probably does expose the fact that the Cowboys are inconsistent at times and don't live up to their potential. But also, this is a team that I think when they put it together, they do have the talent to go out and beat people, even if they get themselves into a negative game script. And so I don't feel a need to really back off of looking on Dallas positively as we head into the playoffs. The Denver Broncos, number 30 in my model. Maybe they've shown a little bit of life lately. Coach gets fired and then they have a decent game, but we don't need to say too much about Denver. They have a 0 turnover differential in the season. They're 1-10 when their turnover differential is even or negative. It's terrible. But it just reinforces that they're not a good team. They're 4-2 when it's positive. So if they can win that turnover battle, they give themselves a chance. But hey, they've still only gone 4-2 when that's the case. So this is a team that truly is not very good this season. We're going to move past them quickly onto a more exciting team who will be playing in a meaningful game. The question is whether it'll be meaningful for them or not, and that is the Detroit Lions. If the Seahawks lose, they will be playing to get into the playoffs, which would be fun. They are exciting. I do think, rightly so, people view them as being better at home, not so good outside, but that's not our focus here. Here it's on the turnover story. They have a +6 turnover differential on the season. And this has been a story of 2 halves of the season for them, right? They went 1-6 in their first 7 games. They had a positive turnover differential in 2 of those games. They were even in 1 and negative in 4. So they put themselves in a negative games situation in 4 out of those first 7, and they lost 6 of 7. So that wasn't good. However, they've gone now 8-2 in their last 10, and they had a positive turnover differential in all 8 of those wins in the last 10. So I think the turnovers have been massive for the Lions. That turnover differential was negative in both of the losses. So what we see recently is if they win the turnover battle, they win the game. They lose the turnover battle, they lose the game. Let's see, what else for them? They have 0 turnovers. Oh, yeah, this is the thing, is they've just been taking care of the ball lately. 0 turnovers in 5 of their last 6, and in that other one, they only had 1 turnover. So I think a big question going into Green Bay this week is, can they continue that against a team that just took it away from the Vikings 4 times? Now, the Vikings participated some, but there were batted passes at the line that Green Bay had, really good coverage. I don't think you can take a lot away from Green Bay's defense in terms of all the turnovers that they caused. So this may be one of the most interesting games of the week to me related to turnovers, because I think Green Bay is coming in hot on defense. And if they can force multiple turnovers, I think they win this game. But the Lions have been taking care of the ball. And if they can continue to do that, I think they put themselves in a really good spot to be competitive and potentially even win the game. The negative for the Lions is they've only had, this is a positive. They've had at least 1 takeaway in 15 of 17 games. So they've been taking the ball away and protecting it. If they can do that again against Green Bay, I think they put themselves in a good spot. Speaking of the dreaded Packers, at least dreaded to me. I know some of you like the cheese. Not over here. But Green Bay, kind of a tale of 2 seasons for them as well, similar to the Lions. Started off like shit and then have turned it around recently. They're number 12 in my model, basically at the exact number of wins they should have based on their turnovers, 0.09 wins above expectation, +4 turnover differential in the season. The Packers are one of these teams where there actually is not a ton to take away from the turnover story, but I think there's a little bit because positive turnover differential, they're 3-2, even 3-2. Negative 2-4. So yeah, it's worse with negative, but that's to be expected, and they've still done okay. And they haven't blown people away when it's positive. Here's what I want to dial in on though with Green Bay. They're on a 4-game win streak. In that win streak, their turnover differential is +3, -1, +3, +4. That -1 was against the Los Angeles Rams, with Baker Mayfield on about 2 days of preparation with a team that is really not good this year. So I'm not trying to take it all away from the Packers, but I will say this. Yes, they blew out the Vikings, and yes, they're on a 4-game win streak. But aside from the worst teams in the league, the Texans, the Bears, the real bottom, if I told you that a team had a turnover differential in games of 3, 3, and 4, what do you think the outcomes would be? I think you'd say that they probably won all those games, and most of them probably won handily. Well, that's what Green Bay has done. Now, like I said earlier, I'm not trying to take anything away from their defense with the turnovers that they've created. This may be what Green Bay's defense is able to do. And if they can do that, then I think they're even a dangerous team in the playoffs, because if they get Aaron Rodgers a 2, 3, 4 turnover differential, a positive turnover differential, they're going to win a lot of games in that kind of game script. So I think this could be a little bit of smoke and mirrors, but if their defense is able to keep it up, then they also could be dangerous. And so in that sense, the turnover differential does have something to say about the Green Bay Packers. A reminder, if you're still with me here and getting any good information out of this, if you could just take a second and hit the like button and even subscribe, I would really appreciate that. Houston Texans, who cares? Number 32 in my model, 0 turnover differential on the season, 0-8 with an even or negative turnover differential. All that says is the Texans are as bad as we think they are. On to the Indianapolis Colts, who we also don't care much about at this point, number 28 in my model. They did have a -11 turnover differential on the season. There's not really anything to say here. They've been bad at every level in relation to turnovers, but they did get themselves off to a terrible start with all the turnovers they had to start the season, and things snowballed on them. So they are where they are. That brings us to a more interesting team, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who will be taking on the Tennessee Titans to see who wins the division. They're number 17 in my model, but they come into this game with the perception of being super hot, especially on offense, but really both sides of the ball seemingly playing really well. And I think a lot of people believe that if this team gets into the playoffs, they could even make some noise. Well, what do the turnovers tell us for the Jaguars? They're 7-2 when their turnover differential is positive or even. So if they can stay even in an even turnover differential situation, they have a really great chance to win the game. Now, they, like the Packers, are on a win streak. It's a 5-game win streak. But I'm going to say that their win streak is even more impressive. +4 on this win streak. This is their turnover differentials. +4, -1, 0, 1, and -2. So in 5 wins, there was one game where, yeah, they had a +4 turnover differential. Of course, they win that game. But other than that, they've been in a negative situation twice, had a 0 and a 1, and still have won 5 in a row. I think that says this is a team that actually is hot. Now, they have a lot of young talent, so we'll see how they do under pressure. But this is a team that I would have to say the turnovers say we should pay attention to, just like everyone's saying we should. Next up is the number 1 team in my wins over expectation model. You could maybe guess who it is. Can give yourself a high five if you get it. It's the Kansas City Chiefs. 5.56 wins over expectation based on turnovers. We know this is one of the best teams in the league. The question is, are they the best? Well, here's the interesting thing with the Chiefs. They actually have a -6 turnover differential on the season. -6, and they are still 13-3 on the year right now. That is incredible. And when you dive in, it's, I think, even more incredible. So they are playing games where there is not a wide turnover differential. There's only one game all season where it wasn't either +1, 0, or -1. And that was Jacksonville. -3 turnover differential against Jacksonville, and they won that game. That's how good Kansas City is. I think basically with Kansas City, it's like if they turn it on and play their best, they can win any game. Turnover differential doesn't really even matter. I think the only reason it matters is if they're playing a close game where they don't have margin for error, or if they don't come out and play their best. But the turnovers say this team is good enough that the turnovers hardly even matter. That's the Kansas City Chiefs. Vegas Raiders, who the Chiefs play this week, number 21 in my model. They're, hey, they can be amazing like they were last week, or they can totally suck like they have many weeks. That's just the story of the Raiders this year. They're 5-3 in the last 8. Not a single positive turnover differential in that whole time frame. So that's pretty phenomenal that they haven't had any positive game states in relation to turnovers. They're still 5-3. Pretty strong. I think that actually shows there could be some upside for the Raiders moving into next season, that they probably are not as bad as what they showed themselves to be this year. Not saying they're like Super Bowl contenders, but next we move on to the Chargers. Their situation is a little complicated. They may or may not be playing people when it comes to their game, but this is a good team on the turnover side. They're number 8 in my model of wins over expectation. They have high upside when they're healthy. Their defense can allow people to run at times, but this is a strong team. And I think most people think they're hitting their stride. So their turnover differential is +4 on the season, and they've won 6 of their last 7. The impressive thing for them is that 2 of those had a -1 turnover differential. And so they even won when that was the case. They're 6-1 when their turnover differential is positive. So that's not bad. They did lose one of those games, but that's okay. They're 5-5 when it's even or negative. So not blowing people away, but also I would put them in the category of teams where if they do end up in a spot where they're negative in the turnover differential, it's not the end of them. They still have a chance to win the game, even though it does hinder their chances. So this is a team, again, part of what I'm looking for here is, are there teams that I believe can win even if they lose the turnover battle, or are there teams that I think they're done if they lose the turnover battle, and how will that affect whether I bet on them or not? So the Chargers are a team that I would still be willing to look at. The Rams, number 27 in my model, not much we need to say here. -2 wins. 2 wins in the last 4. They were +1 and +4 in those in turnover differential. So they're just not good. And the turnovers say the same thing. Miami Dolphins, they may be screwed by their quarterback situation. They're number 11 in my model for wins over expectation. They have a -6 turnover differential on the year. So right now they're on a 6-game losing streak. That's really not good. 3 of the 6 have had a negative turnover differential, but 2 of them have been positive. It's kind of a bad look. I know that their quarterback situation has been messy and rough, but to lose 2 games in the last 6 where you had a positive turnover differential just doesn't look good for this team. Before the 5-game win streak, 3 of their 5 games had a positive turnover differential, 1 even, 1 negative. In their win streak, 3 of them were positive, 1 even, 1 negative. So that was okay. And in their 3 games without Tua, their turnover differential has been -2, -3, -2. So they've killed themselves on the turnover front when Tua isn't starting. All right, we get to the M's with the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings are super overrated, if you haven't heard, and I can't totally. Well, the only reason I don't think they're overrated is I don't think people rate them very highly. So I will say there is a lot to point to Minnesota not being as good as their record. And I've put stuff out there before where I totally agree with that. I think that is a very rational and right take. I do think we should listen to what the turnovers have to say on Minnesota, though. In my wins over expectation model, they're number 3, 3.5 wins better than projection based on their turnovers. They're 10-0 when they have a positive or even turnover differential. That's the best in the league when they keep it positive or even. That says, well, and let me add this, they're 3-4 when they have a negative turnover differential. Wait, I have won too many games. Sorry, it's either maybe it's 3-3 or 2-4, whatever. They've won games even with a negative turnover differential. Their losses, yeah, it would have to be 2-4. That's what it is. It's 2-4, not 3-4. Losses, they had turnover differentials of -2, -1, -2, and -4. Now, to be fair, they got throttled, especially by the Cowboys and the Packers, just throttled. But the Packers had a kickoff return. The Packers had a pick six. They had a +4 turnover differential against the Vikings. I mean, what do we expect the score to be in a game where that's true? And again, I'm not taking stuff away from the Packers, just saying, if you listen to the story the turnovers are telling, what it says is when stuff snowballs on Minnesota and they lose that turnover battle, they could be in big trouble. And if they lose, they're probably not going to lose by just a few points. They're probably going to get destroyed. But if they can stay even or positive, they're probably going to play a close game. And so far this year, they've found ways to pull those out. So I just think that Minnesota, as much as almost any team in the league, the turnovers tell a huge story with them and are incredibly important. So it's going to be a benefit to them to play at home, where they tend to be a little better with this. Obviously, not always. Next up, New England Patriots, still in the mix for the playoffs. Kind of a solid mid-tier team, not a contender. They're number 26 in my wins over expectation model. They have a +7 turnover differential this year. Here's the big thing for me with them. They're only 6-4 when their turnover differential is positive. And they're 0-3 when it's negative. That does not indicate a good team. I'm giving you 10 games with a positive turnover differential and you're 6-4. Not very good. So they've lost 3 of their last 4, and one of those they had a +2 turnover differential. So I think this team is worse than we even think they are. Unless they just do everything right, this is a team that should be losing. And if they make the playoffs, I'll look forward to betting against them. New Orleans Saints, number 13 in my model. I'm not going to spend much time here. Another, like the Colts, -12 on the season. They're 5-0 in games where they have an even turnover differential, but 1-7 when it's negative. So they've killed themselves with the turnovers this year. The Giants, another playoff team, number 18 in my model, positive or +5 on the season. They're another one of these teams where it's just an anomaly, and I don't think that you can play turnovers into your capping too much with the Giants, because they're 4-3-1 when their turnover differential is positive, 4-1 when it's equal, 2-2 when it's negative. So just not a strong enough story there with the turnover differential for the Giants. The New York Jets, number 16 in my model, -8 on the season. I mean, real quick, because it doesn't really matter with the Jets, but for them, this was a year of do we turn it over or not? Positive turnover differential, 6-0. Negative turnover differential, 0-9. Equal, 1-1. So, I mean, this is like split as evenly as it could be for any team. When the Jets turned it over, they lost, and when they got takeaways, they won, period. Philadelphia Eagles, this is an interesting one. I think this is one I'm paying attention to along with the Vikings. The narrative or sentiment with the Eagles right now is that they're losing steam, that losing Lane Johnson is a huge loss, and that they're going to struggle to win without him. Now, losing Lane Johnson is a huge loss if you look at the splits. And maybe part of that fact is that they might be more turnover prone when Lane Johnson is out because the protection isn't as good. We'll see what Jalen Hurts can do with his feet to avoid that. But let's dive into this. They're number 4 in my wins over expectation model at 3.35 wins over expectation. +6 on the season, but when their turnover differential is positive, they're 10-0. So this is also telling a story of if they win the turnover battle, they win the game. They're 4-3 when that turnover differential is equal or negative. They had a negative turnover differential in 3 of their last 4. We know that Minshew started 2 of those. They only had 1 game the entire rest of the season where they had a negative turnover differential. So they went from, what is that? Take 1 out of 13 was negative to 3 out of 4. This is, I think, a massive part of the reason that the Eagles are sliding here. And we can factor Lane Johnson in however we want, Gardner Minshew, defensive injuries, all that stuff. But the turnovers are massive for the Eagles. They had a -3 turnover differential versus Dallas, and they still almost won that game. That says something. I think the Eagles are still a very good team. They just got to take care of the ball, try to get a takeaway or 2. Pittsburgh, number 14 in my model, +3 on the year. I'm not going to spend too much time here. I know that they might make the playoffs. They're 8-2 when their turnover differential is plus or even, 0-6 when it's negative. So basically, if they have a negative turnover differential, they lose the game. 5 of their first 8 games were negative. So we see why they started off the season poorly. Only 1 of the last 9 has been negative. So we see why they've turned it around and are playing better. This is a defense that's playing well, and I wouldn't put it past them to continue winning the turnover battle. And if they do that, they're definitely in the mix to beat people, maybe other than the very top teams in the league. All right, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams left to go. Some of these are playoff teams. Well, 4 of them could be. San Francisco 49ers up next, +6 with 1.56 wins over expectation, +10 turnover differential on the season. This is another one, clear cut. Positive turnover differential, 13-0. Negative, 0-4. It's crazy that that they haven't had an equal turnover differential the whole season. And they haven't had a negative one since Purdy took over a quarterback. So they have been running off games where they are winning the turnover battle. Positive turnover differential in 8 straight games. I wonder what happens if they get into the playoffs and they have another negative one. Maybe they won't be quite as strong as we thought they were, but this is a team that has such a profoundly good defense, except for last week, where they just get the takeaways and it translates into wins. Seattle, next up, chance to make the playoffs still, number 19 in my model, so not that good. They've lost 4 of 5, and all 4 of those games had a negative turnover differential. The game they won was against the Jets last week, where their turnover differential was +3. So again, we just see the narrative is the Seahawks have run out of gas and they're not as good, blah, 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 all the injuries. Yeah, all that's true. But really what it's come down to is when they win the turnover battle, they won. And when they lose it, they lose the game. And they're just not taking care of the ball or getting turnovers anymore. They only had a negative turnover differential in 1 of their first 12 games. So they're 0-5 when it's negative, 8-4 when it's positive or equal. So this is a team that's just fine when they win the turnover battle or keep it even, but they don't win. But the 49ers don't win when their turnover differential is negative. A lot of teams don't win when that's the case. Seattle's another one of those. So if they can win that, I think they can stay in any of these games. I don't think they're as bad as people are feeling like they are right now. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, one of my most hated teams on the season. They are number 10 in my wins over expectation model with 0.47. They've only had a positive turnover differential in 4 games this year. 3-1 in those games. So they've done just fine, not outstanding, but just fine when they have a positive turnover differential. They've had it in the last 2, which were both wins, but they barely won those games too. Well, I guess not with the Panthers. They beat them fine. But the Cardinals, they barely beat the Cardinals with a positive turnover differential. I think if anything, this is just telling you if they get the takeaways, maybe they can win. But this is a team that turns the ball over. And even in games where they don't, they just still prove to not be very good. So I know Tampa Bay is going to be dangerous in the playoffs because of the talent that they have on that roster. It's been true all season. It's just going to be hard for me to roll with them with how poor they've shown themselves to be week to week. Next to last team is the Tennessee Titans. They have fallen off a cliff. Number 22 with minus 1.59 wins over expectation, minus 3 turnover differential in the season. This is another one of those anomaly teams to me. When they have a positive turnover differential, dog shit, 3-4, just terrible. When it's even, 2-2, all right, I guess what you'd expect. When it's negative 2-4, oh, that's pretty good. You won 2 of your 4 games when you had a negative turnover differential. Who the hell knows with this team, man? I mean, they've had all the quarterback issues. They have underperformed in many games, especially lately here. They're just on this long losing streak. I have no idea what to think about the Titans and if Josh Dobbs can give them any kind of life. But I don't think turnovers have much to say about it for them. Last and almost least, the Washington Commanders, number 15 in my model. They fell along the turnover lines too. 4-0 when it's positive, 2-1 when it's equal, 1-7 when it's negative. They had a chance to make the playoffs, and they lost 4 straight games. 3 of those last 4, they had a negative turnover differential. They just shot themselves in the foot. Carson Wentz helped to do that in the last game, and they will not be in the playoffs. That is a team-by-team rundown of what the turnovers tell us about each team in the league, with a particular focus on the playoff teams. I hope that you can take that information, as I will be, and work it in with the other things that you know are important as you're thinking about the games for this weekend and then into the playoffs. I would encourage you, D Nice will be putting out his Wager Rager podcast, I believe, on Friday. That will have a deeper dive into lots of the different components of some of these key games. So make sure you check that out when it comes out. And we will be back, I'm sure, talking NFL, maybe this week, and then certainly through the playoffs. Have a great rest of your week, and I will talk to you later.